Monster of the Week is the shit, okay? Not enough people know about the system, and that's a shame, because it's an absolute blast to play. I know that I briefly mentioned this game in one of my other videos, but at that time I had barely even started to discover how awesome this game can be. If you ask me right now what my favorite RPG system is, I would say this is it. That might change in a few months, who knows, but that doesn't matter. If you play RPGs at all, or if you like any of these shows, then you need to give this game a shot. Here's 3 reasons why, including one reason that also explains what the hell this game is about. Reason number 1, urban fantasy is the best genre for RPGs, changed my mind. Some of you watching this video may not be familiar with the term urban fantasy, but pretty much everyone has been exposed to it in some way or another. Basically, urban fantasy is a genre that's set in the modern world in which magic and monsters are real, but most people don't believe in them. This game specifically emulates the feel of TV shows like Supernatural and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, in which the players are a team of monster hunters that have to deal with a new threat every episode. Usually, they'll investigate some kind of mysterious disappearance or weird phenomenon, discover what kind of creature was behind it, track it down, and kill it by exploiting its signature weakness. Depending on what the group agrees on, the players can be anything from scrappy high schoolers defending their monster-infested hometown to specially trained government agents traveling across the world investigating secret cases. If you've seen either of these shows, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't, then don't worry. There are a ton of other series that the creators have also taken inspiration from, like the Dresden Files, Stranger Things, X-Files, The Mortal Instruments, 20 Palaces, and a ton more that I'm probably missing. If you or a player of yours really has trouble grasping the point of this game, then it's Scooby-Doo. It's fucking Scooby-Doo with guns. Hope everything's clear now. Anyway, back to the point. Urban fantasy is pretty much the perfect setting for role-playing games, because it allows for all the cool magic powers and spooky creatures that you want, while still retaining the relatability of the real world in the 21st century. Compared to a completely constructed world, the real world is generally easier to care about. No matter how elaborate your homebrew medieval fantasy kingdom or sci-fi galaxy may be, it'll be difficult for your players to become familiar with it to the point of being truly invested, and the background details of the setting might distract them from the focus of the game. But since most roleplayers live on Earth, at least from what I can tell, then they'll be able to divert their full attention to the small number of differences from the real world that are there. The ones that really matter, in the form of monsters to kill and supernatural powers to use. A more subtle reason why I think urban fantasy works so well in RPGs is because it allows you to incorporate humor in a way that actually makes sense in the narrative. It's no secret that role-playing game sessions tend to range from completely ridiculous to maybe kind of serious while still leaving a generous helping of jokes. And staying completely serious for a whole game session can be next to impossible. For the most part, this is not a bad thing. The purpose of any game is to have fun before anything else, and it just so happens that most role-players like to goof around. My only issue is that a lot of the humor you typically find at a role-playing table is based on pop culture references and other things that only 21st century humans are gonna find funny. If you make fun of a D&D villain by saying that he looks like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, you're breaking immersion in this medieval fantasy world, and you either have to keep it out of character or come to terms with the fact that the fictional universe has no internal consistency at all. But if you make a joke like this in Monster of the Week, it'll fit right in. In fact, you could even use it to your advantage by distracting a villain this way. Tongue-in-cheek, snarky humor is a big part of what makes shows like Buffy so fun to watch, and it meshes really well with the kind of humor you'll typically find at a role-playing table. Reason number 2, this system runs incredibly smoothly and really knows how to replicate the feel of its genre. Now, there are plenty of other urban fantasy games out there, some of which are more popular than Monster of the Week, including Vampire the Masquerade and arguably Call of Cthulhu. But I think that Monster of the Week is better than those games, for a couple of reasons. First of all, Monster is much lighter and more comedic in tone than either of them, at least as it's intended, which is better for a role-playing game if you ask me. Secondly, this game is just incredibly streamlined and easy to learn. This is true of most of the games that are based on the Apocalypse World engine, but I'll focus on Monster for now, even though many of these games are also worth checking out. Nobody will ever complain about this game having complicated math and endless dice rolls. Every single roll uses 2 6-sided dice, plus 1 of 5 modifiers, with an occasional bonus or penalty here and there. If you get a 10 or more, you succeed. If you get a 7 to 9, you succeed with a caveat. And if you get a 6 or lower, you fail. That's it. That's basically the entire system. Every single role will be either one of the 8 basic moves or a special move on your character sheet. The GM never rolls at all. If that sounds restrictive, it isn't. The basic moves are really broad, and they cover pretty much all of the basic challenges that the characters would face on a monster hunting trip. I've never been in a scenario where one of the hunters couldn't find a move to use. Also, the special moves on the character sheets are absolutely brilliant. I'm not going to say that there aren't any overpowered or underpowered options, but outside of pure stat boosts, which are pretty hard to come by, all of the special moves are creative and fun to use. And they reinforce the idea that this game is at least as much about investigation as it is about fighting. You know how in D&D there are supposed to be 3 pillars of gameplay, but at least 80% of the rules are dedicated to combat, and because of this, 80% of playtime will often consist of combat? That's not the case here. When combat does come along, it's treated like any other part of the game. There's no turn cycle. The players can just say whatever they want to do whenever it's appropriate, and the GM will just respond to each action accordingly. If the PCs come prepared, a fight can be over with just a couple of rolls. Overall, this game's philosophy is different than that of a game like D&D, which tries to create an accurate simulation of the physics and precise actions of the game world and reward micromanaging. Monster is much more of an abstract system, which allows players' moves to directly affect the outside narrative and speed the plot along. The classes aren't entirely about what you can do, they're also about what role you serve in the story. As an example, there's a class called Mundane, which is supposed to be a completely normal guy without any powers or even any extraordinary skills, who just happens to be tangled up in the supernatural world, like Xander from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. You couldn't make Xander as a D&D character. At least, he wouldn't be close to the same level as Buffy, or he would have to be hilariously unoptimized. On paper, his capabilities are just nowhere near comparable to those of his teammates. But this game provides special moves for the Mundane playbook, like Oops, which allows the character to stumble upon something important once per session, or Don't Worry, I'll Check It Out, which allows you to gain experience whenever you go off by yourself to check out something scary. The latter of which would move the plot along and give your character room to grow into something else. It's things like this that allow supposedly underpowered characters to contribute just as much, if not more, to the story as their superpowered friends, and potentially be more fun to play. Part 3, this is one of the easiest games ever to just pick up and play. Open a browser. Search for Monster of the Week resources. Click on the first link. There you go! There's everything you need to play. You got the character sheets, which this game calls playbooks, the adventure planning sheet, the basic rules, and even a little bit of expansion content. If you're a player, just take your playbook and the basic rules, and it'll tell you pretty much everything you need to know. All of your classes' special moves and their descriptions are right there on the playbook. If you want, you can take other moves from other playbooks when you level up, or even switch to a new playbook completely, but it's an optional thing. For now, all you need to do is pick up a playbook, come up with a character concept, and check off some boxes. I've had a group of 6 completely new players, a couple of whom didn't have any role-playing experience at all, finished making characters and ready to play within half an hour. If you're the GM, or the keeper as this game calls it, then your job will be a little bit more difficult, and it might be worth it to buy the book, which gives some very useful advice on adventure design, but you can definitely run a game without it. The mystery worksheet and keeper reference sheets really do cover all the bases of how to plan a session, especially if you're exposed to the concept of the game. Basically, for most sessions, you're going to pick some sort of supernatural creature that's haunting the town, and then provide a reason for the hunters to get involved, detail some key locations that the hunters might visit, probably including the monster's lair if applicable, some NPCs that might help out or get in the way, and write down what would happen if the characters didn't show up on the countdown section. I know that information might be a little bit vague, and the book goes into a lot more detail, but I don't think it's completely necessary. When in doubt, you can just steal concepts from Buffy or Supernatural, or pretty much any horror movie you've seen. I know I keep mentioning these shows since they're definitely the main inspirations for this game, but the majority of my players haven't seen either of them, and they still really enjoy our sessions. Although, they're both really good shows, and if you have nothing to do, then you should maybe check them out. So yeah, hopefully this video convinced you to give this game a shot sometime. If you couldn't tell, this game is extremely episodic in structure. If you've been playing for a while, it's generally a good idea to develop a more interconnected plot with a big overarching villain, but for the most part, this game assumes that you'll be solving one distinct mystery and killing a monster every single session. So you don't need to commit to a longer campaign at all if you just want to try it. If this video does well, I'll definitely make more videos about this game. Maybe going through some house rules of mine and some tips for planning adventures. So if you enjoyed this video, or if you already played this game and you wanted to get more exposure, make sure to hit that like button, maybe consider subscribing, and see y'all next time.